And to unpack that story for us and put it into perspective, we have with us Dr. Nilanjan Banik, senior economist. Thank you very much, Dr. Banik. Now, in the forecast of Moody's, do you think it's too conservative because it's lower than India's own official estimates?
Conservative is actually good because the reason why they are conservative because they are kind of alloying the inflation factor. The reason why you see that our projected GDP growth is in plus of 7% has to do with the fact that our although the nominal GDP is growing at 10 plus percentage level, but the inflation in recent times are down. So when they are saying that 6.4%, which is a conservative estimate, basically they are actually giving some room for a higher inflation if that were to crawl in the future. So that is a good thing. I don't see any bad thing in
Okay.
that.
But,
But
right.
my sense is going forward, we are going to grow in excess of 6.5 plus percentage point.
Indeed, Dr. Banik, also, one looks at it as if they are overestimating the risks also of external shocks. How strong is domestic demand, which is propping up the economy and has done so pretty ably through the last year?
So there are some enabling factor because let me give you two small example. It all started with this jam trinity. Jam trinity basically meaning that you have a social security number in the form of other. Now what that has led to, it has actually led you to get telephone connection. Once you have a telephone connection, it actually help you to do businesses. And once you start doing businesses, that means you are creating your book of account, which also allow you to get access to formal loans. So all this thing has actually democratized the way of doing business. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs, lots of small time vendors now are in a position to do business in the Indian market. You should remember that 60% of our demand is actually driven by the domestic economy.
Yes.
So that is one portion of the thing which has actually helped a uniform growth process. In fact, the recent data from the rural economy show there is an uptick in rural demand as well, in addition to what we are seeing in the context of urban demand. Now,
Yes.
having said that, let me come to the second part of the story, which is some kind of government intervention in the form of PLI scheme. You might be knowing that recently India is planning to buy 114 Rafale from France.
Yes.
Now, when that happened, most part of it, I think out of 114, only 14 or 15 Rafale will be purchased in the flying in condition. The remaining 90% of the Rafale will be manufactured in India with the technology being transferred with the
Right.
way to make in India program will be bolstered. Now, just to give you some numbers, if I'm talking about the white collar jobs, we are talking about around 40 million people who are in the white collar jobs. But this 40 million people is actually creating demand for around 200 odd million people who are working in the in the so-called blue collar
Sure.
sector. So, for
So,
instance, watchman, domestic help, things like
So
that.
you're explaining to us really the chain or the basically of domestic demand. But Moody's highlights also strong asset quality, capital buffers with the banks. But they are talking about MSME stress. So how serious is this caution, and could it lead to greater dependence on some sort of shadow banking?
So, in terms of the health of our financial sector, it has actually improved. It has not fallen. Because if I look into the CASA of some of the public sector bank, it actually showcased that the non-performing assets have come down. So far as the MSME sectors were concerned, I think a much part of this year they were troubled by the Trump's tariff, because if I'm talking about the textile, if I'm talking about Jameson jewelry, if I'm talking about fisheries, crustaceans, or even some of the leather footwears industry,
Right.
they were actually getting disturbed with the Trump tariff. Now that we have signed the deal with the US economy and also with European Union and some other countries, including New Zealand and Oman, what I hope that maybe in the coming year or much part of this year, you will see that some of the stress which are hitting the MSME sector, in particular in the textile, gems and jewelry, leather footwear, and fisheries sector, that is going to ease up because
Okay.
this signing this FTA also imply that with a lower tariff, we are going to get access to a bigger market, not necessarily in India, but across the world.
Uh, so does the budget provide room then for sustained consumption? You did mention earlier about inflationary pressures. Do you see them in the medium term?
Inflationary pressure, most part of the inflation, domestic inflation, if you see, is driven by the oil factor, And the only way the crude oil price can go up is if we see a war which is breaking in the Middle East region. But given what has happened over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I don't see the possibility of the Iran-US war breaking up in the Middle East. And if that does not happen, because India import almost 80% of our import has to do with the crude oil import. And because oil is intermediate inputs, that actually lead to the inflationary pressure. The other way inflation can happen if we don't have a good rainfall. Now, last year we have had good rainfall year, which also explain why the agricultural output was robust. So therefore, if I look into this or combine these two factors, including agricultural output and the price of oil, which is basically the price of intermediate inputs, I don't see the inflation is going to creep in a big way. And if that doesn't happen, I think that India, in terms of the growth that we are seeing, will be able to sustain the growth in the real term.
Also, Dr. Banik, what indicators should policymakers be tracking to ensure that this growth is sustained beyond FY27? Because there are going to be, new base years that are coming into effect. Also, when we look long term, are the factors different?
So, some of the government has already undertaken few reforms, right? If I'm talking about the labor market, they have actually brought down from 32 different labor codes now to 4 main labor codes, which actually is giving some kind of signal to the foreign manufacturing entities that in terms of labor laws, we are becoming much more friendly in terms of helping the manufacturers come and manufacture or open up their manufacturing base in India. Going forward, I think a few sets of such reforms, in particular, let's say in terms of having access to, let's say, land, So the land reform would be the next big one. We are also talking about disinvestment. That can be taken as another sets of reform because as Mr. Modi has mentioned, that government would be acting as an enabler rather than trying to shoo away the private parties to do business. I think going forward, we are going to see more such reforms. In particular, some of the states are already doing what we call plug and play infrastructure. They are providing
Right.
plug and play infrastructure, meaning they are actually providing you with all the necessary inputs that is required for any factory to become operational. For instance, they are giving environmental clearance, they are giving access to water, electricity, land parcel is being given in a ready format. So
Yes.
this kind of thing we are going to see also happening. And also in terms of ease of doing business, India
Sure.
has actually taken a large leap forward.
So that is
You know,
what economists like you will be looking at in the long term to see
yeah.
sustainability. Thanks very much, Dr. Nilanjan Banik, for putting all that into perspective for us.
Thank you very
Now
much.
let's take